Hello everyone, this is Phobo and today we are going to do a little tutorial about Civ. We're actually going to start from absolute zero so that fresh players can follow. If you are looking for a much more in-depth strategy guide, then I would suggest that you visit Madjin's blog. He has a wonderful series called Beyond the Monument that has very high degrees of in-depth information. That is not the intent here. I just want to show new people what the game is about and how to avoid very common pitfalls. And the best way to do that is to talk about all the important things in Civ one by one, I think. And well, let's get started with that. So, Civilization is a turn-based strategy game. I assume everyone knows this. But unlike some other games like Europa Universalis 4, the idea is not to reenact history, but to make up history of your own. Now, let's take a look at setting up a game. I think that the first thing you should decide on is the map size. I always go for standard, and there are some reasons for that. The bigger your map becomes, the longer turn times take, and the more annoying the game can get, because with more players and city-states, things tend to get messed up a lot. It's also much more difficult with a larger map because some mechanics just don't scale well. And the same goes for smaller maps. It becomes easier as you get smaller, but when you get to duel, you get into a very strange situation. So standard, I think, is the best. It allows you the most options without making things too complicated. So I suggest people actually play that, and only when you have become very comfortable with this, go to other things. Now I must say, if your computer is weak, then I suggest small maps. They are a little smaller but still very manageable, but the turn times of the AI decrease a lot. So we always go for standard here. Map type, I always play random. It's either one of these four you get then. Maybe there are a few others in there, but usually I take random. Sometimes it's fun to play on the Earth map, but it's mostly the same. There are very small variations only. You can get more map types in the advanced setup, but again, these are things that you should not mess with at the start. Only when you are very comfortable with it, you can go do that. Random map type, you don't know what you'll get. In senses of difficulty, it goes from Archipelago to Fractal and Pangea and large islands to, in the end, continents. Continents is the most difficult, I think, because you are cut off from half the civilizations and will not meet them very early in the game. That makes it so that you cannot interact with them, and it causes a few problems that are difficult to solve. The others are, well, Pangea is reasonably difficult because you will be engaged in land wars, and sea wars are just easier. And Pangea is also more difficult because it allows for more city spam and more powerful city locations. So those are the differences. Game pace, I always go for standard. Again, this is because of balancing issues. Epic is 50% longer, I think, and Marathon is much longer, but the longer your game lasts, the easier it is to wage war, because unit experience, for example, is not calculated in the longer turn time, so you get more powerful units, which benefits the human player. Quick is the opposite. It goes very fast. Sometimes it doesn't give you the time to do what you want to do, so I always go for standard. And difficulty level determines how hard the AIs will be. Now, as you may know, I always play at deity, but that's a very, very bad place to start. I suggest that you go with Prince, because Prince is really quite easy, but it may be challenging for first-time players. While Warlord, Chieftain and Settler, they say easy beginner and for learning the game, but I think you can't really learn much from these first three, because Prince is still very easy but has the concept of being a little challenging even when you don't know anything about the game. So if you want to scale down for your first game, I suggest, Warlord is still okay, but lower than Prince should not be needed. We'll click on that. Next part is choosing your civilization. As of Brave New World, I think there are 43, so that's a lot. Each of them has 3 abilities. One unique ability that is always valid, and then either a unit or a building in one of these 2 slots. The units replace existing units, so they are, for example, the hoplite is a little stronger than the equivalent you get with another civilization. If we go, for example, for Ethiopia, then you get Mehal Safari, which replaces, I think, some infantry unit and has some bonus if you are fighting in your own terrain. Other things are buildings that replace an existing building. The bazaar, for example, replaces, I assume, the market, and it gives you extra luxuries. We'll get more into that later. Suffice it to say that each civilization has 3 unique things going for it, and depending on the combination or one of those 3 things, you are going to have a very different playstyle, or at least you can go for a different playstyle. Now we are going for a random leader this time, because it doesn't really matter, and we are going to start up and see what the game looks like. We got Maria.
Blessings be upon you, most gracious Queen Maria, protector and sovereign of the Portuguese
This
people.
top
As
part
the
gives
first
some
ever Queen
information
Regnant of
about
Portugal, it was your
civilization you are
wise
playing, and
stewardship
here you can
that
see
protected
your
the royal
3
court from the incursions
special
of Napoleon,
abilities. Extra
establishing
gold
a
from
safe
trade
haven in
routes,
Brazil
that's
to
really
preserve the
strong.
integrity of
A
Portuguese
unique
rule.
boat,
Despite struggling with
and
illness
an
throughout your reign,
improvement
your
for
efforts to ensure Portugal's close
extra
cooperation with
resources.
Brazil are credited with helping
If
that
you are
state
playing, you
gain
can
its
check that out
eventual
yourself.
independence.
We
And for
won't go
this,
deeper into
you'll
them,
always
as
be
that
admired
would
and
take a
respected
lot
by
of
the
time
people
to
of
do for
both
all
nations.
civilizations. Now, the first thing you will see is that the map consists of many different kinds of tiles. Coastal tiles, as you can see here, and if we move our warriors, you can see that there are forests here, hills, and tiles with special abilities. They will say what they do when you hover over them. You start with one warrior and one settler. The initial settler will settle your capital, and the capital will get some special abilities. Now, it's quite important where you settle, as you will have 3 tiles of range around your city, and in those 3 tiles you can do things. So our city will eventually reach up to here, here, and then go all the way around here. That will be its sphere of influence. Everything in that is connected to this city and can be used by it. Now, what do you have to look out for is luxuries. That's gems and spices here. Luxuries, when improved, will give you happiness. Happiness is required for a few things. We will go into that later. And you can potentially, if you have more than one, or well, if you don't need the happiness, you can sell them to an AI for gold. So you want to have as many of those as possible. The specialty tiles like wheat, they don't just give that bonus that you see here, but there are also buildings that work combined with them. Like a granary will further increase the tile yield of this tile. Settling is usually best done on a hill. This is not a necessity, but it's often better. The hill will provide a defensive bonus to your city, and it will increase its initial production, which can be very important. I will show you this now. We are going to found our city. There we go, Lisbon. And the borders you see here are its sphere of influence. Everything in that can be worked and used. Now let's go over this. This is your science. Beakers per turn is also a name that's used for that. And the science determines how fast you research new technologies. There is a screen here. We just completed agriculture. And if we open this, we can select a new path to research. We can, for example, go for pottery. This will cost 40 science, so that means 10 turns of research. And it will give us access to a granary, which provides extra food, or a shrine, which provides fate. And that's usually the best one. There are also others like animal husbandry, which allows you to see horses on the map, which allows you to improve horses and cows and create a trade caravan. And there are many other technologies. We will go into those much later, but for now we will just click on pottery and it will take us 10 turns of 4 science to complete that. Now, how do we get those science points? This is quite simply done by your amount of population. As you can see here, each point of population in your city, that's this number, provides you with 1 science. And your capital has the palace, which provides another 3 science. So we start with 4. Second number is gold. Gold is used to buy things quite simply. Most units that you can build, you can also buy. And when you buy units, they appear in your city. When you buy buildings, they are active immediately. You can use gold to buy extra tiles around your city if you would so desire. Or you can use gold to upgrade units. If I researched a technology that would give me a better unit than a warrior in the same line, then I could use money to upgrade it. Money can also be used for various other things. We'll probably see a few of those. One of the important things is maintenance of both buildings and units. So as you build buildings, they will require maintenance, and units also require maintenance. The third thing here is your active trade caravans. We don't have any. We don't have any other cities near us to trade with anyway, but we'll go into that later. Arguably the most important of these numbers is this one, not because the other ones are less important, but because If you were ever to fall into unhappiness, there are immediate consequences for that. If you are unhappy, your cities will grow much, much slower. If you are unhappy, you will get penalties in combat and you will not reach golden ages. You will also have penalties to production, and if your unhappiness grows too high, like say -10, you will get rebels in your area. If it gets to -20, you will even lose cities to other players. So, how does that happiness work? You get 1 for each population, as you see here, and you get 3 for every city. So this produces 4 unhappiness, and we get 9 from difficulty level. How do we increase it? Through social policies, more on that in a few minutes, and with luxuries. Those are the main ways of increasing it. There are also buildings that provide happiness, and those will come much later in the game. And each of these luxuries will provide you with 4 happiness. So if I were to build a new city here, for example, then I would get 3 plus 1 from its starting population. I would go to 1 happiness, and another city here, for example, would mean that I go to -3 happiness. That means that those cities would stop growing, and that of course has repercussions, because if you stop growing, then your science will stop going up, and you can work less tiles. Every extra population you have can work 1 tile, as you see here. We'll get back to that once we are through all this. This is your golden age meter. Every point of excess happiness you have in a turn is added to this, and if you reach this number, you go into a golden age. Golden ages produce extra gold, production, and culture. They are very important, but well, they are not absolutely critical, as you will see when we get further in. Now, there is a lot going on in civilization games, and a lot of it is working in the background. And much like in World of Warcraft, for example, you can specialize the way your empire functions with a talent tree. And in Civ, this talent tree is unlocked by creating culture points. Culture points come from cultural buildings and other things of various nature, like landmarks and specialists. And when you fill up this bucket of culture, you get a new talent of any of these here, and they form the lifeblood of your empire. We will do a video entirely on those, and so I won't show any of them to you now, but suffice it to say that all the background work, these are all passive abilities, all the background work of your empire is done through these social policies. So it's very important to get as many as possible and pick them wisely. This number indicates tourism. Tourism comes in much later in the game and is used for the cultural victory. To win a cultural victory, you must match the culture output of all enemy civs with your own tourism output. So to create culture, you need to build wonders and artifacts. How to do that is something for much later, but suffice it to say that if you want to go for the cultural victory, you will need to create pieces of art, etc., etc., and use them to slot up buildings here, like the palace. It has a slot for great work of art to get a tourism bonus. And the last number here is Fate. Fate allows you to create a religion and spread it. as well as do some other things with it depending on what features of it you choose. We will in this game go for all of these things just to show off the different mechanics. Now that we have gone through this, let's take a look at the next part. Let's take a look at the city itself. There are a few numbers on here. The top is the combat strength, and looking at that combat strength, it would be much lower, I think 10, if we settled on flatlands, so that will help defend it. The combat strength determines how much damage you take from attacks. If you can see the warrior here, it has 8, so it will do much less damage to a city with 15 than it would do to something like, say, 10. There is a division involved there somewhere. And especially early on, this combat strength of the city is going to determine whether or not you can hold on to it if in case of war. Later on, the combat strength becomes much less important because with ranged attacks you can just stand around it and damage it repeatedly without taking damage in return. The other number here is the size. As your city grows bigger, it can work more tiles. Every citizen here can be put on a tile. There is automatic maintenance for it, you can check it here. And this tile is being worked, which provides 2 food and 1 hammer. The hammer is a point of production. The settling of your city means that you get 2 food there, plus the tile yield, in this case that's 2 hammers, but if you settle on flatlands that will be much less. Of course, the palace again provides extra production, so you're never left without any. You automatically gain 1, I think, so the hill provides only 1 extra. I'm not entirely sure. We will settle 1 on flatlands next to see how the difference works out. But for now, let's take a look at the food situation. Per citizen in your city, you require 2 food to maintain them, as you can see here. And every other point of food that you produce is added to the surplus. The surplus requires, apparently, 15 food before the city will grow. So if we produce 4 and we eat 2, that's 2 per turn, that's 8 turns until we grow to size 2, at which point we will be working in these 3 tiles probably. And then we again will have 2 surplus food. 2 surplus food, that will be, well, maybe 10 or 11 turns for the next one. The amount of food you need, the extra amount of food, always goes up depending on the size of your city. So that's what it does. If we were to say work this tile instead, we would only have enough food to support our current population, but we would have 1 extra point of production and 3 extra points of gold. Early on in the game, the only thing that truly matters is food to grow and hopefully get as much production as we can. But even production in the early game is not as important as growing to a reasonable size of city. So you could slot this up and say, yeah, that will give us 7 instead of 6, but the actual amount of benefit you get from that is extremely low. Likewise for gold, we really don't need much gold at the beginning. We need to grow, because more growing will mean that we can work these 2 tiles. And then when we grow to size 4, perhaps we can work these 2 and this one. and that will also give us more science and more everything. So growth is very important, and the only thing we have to watch out for when growing is that we do not exceed our happiness. So that's our first priority, growing, growing, growing. And next on the list is choosing an opening. Now openings in Civ, there are only a few that are correct, and almost all of them start with a scout. The traditional openings are scout monument, scout monument, or scout worker, but a scout is generally always right, unless you notice that you are on a small island. In that case, you can go for a monument or a worker immediately. This is one thing that's very, very important early on. I cannot stress this enough, but the most important thing to do from the beginning is explore the area around you as much as possible, because the benefits you get from that are enormous. For every civ you meet, you can trade with them, which is really good. If you lack something or if you have a surplus of something, you can trade it for gold. You can make agreements with them. You can become friends with them, which allows you to sell things to them for lump sums. Otherwise, it's always a trade for gold per turn. But also for every civ you meet, you get a bonus to research techs that they already know. So that's even more incentive to meet them. There will also be city-states, which are independent cities that give you quests. And the earlier you meet these, the more quests you will be able to complete for them, which gives you influence, and if you have enough influence, you will get bonuses. In addition, you will want to know what type of terrain there is around you, because you will want to know how much to expand, how much settlers you will need, how much workers you will need, if you need an army. For example, if Mongolia or something was right around here, then I would need to build an army to defend against them. Whereas if this entire area is open and clear, then I won't need an army early on. This is quite important. Not quite important, it's the most important thing to do, and the easiest thing to fail when you are starting out is not exploring enough. It's an investment, yes, but it will pay itself back. Now, I would not recommend going for multiple scouts unless you already know that you are on a Pangea map, but building 2 is not a sin, so going for 1 is fine, going for 2 is still okay. If you are on a water map with small islands, an archipelago or something like that, then the problem becomes a little harder because you won't be able to explore early on, and you'll have to build a boat to do that. But on this map, a scout will be just fine. Here you can see the production meter. It will take 5 turns before it is completed. And if we had set up on flatlands, that would always be 7 turns. So, yeah. That's about it, I think, for this first video. I think we went over all the basics. Yes, one more thing. If you can settle on a coast, like here, with your capital, then that is almost invariably a good thing, because trade routes come in 2 varieties, one land and one sea. And the sea trade routes are much more powerful than the land trade routes, I think twice as powerful even. So you want that, and you will want to make ships at some point. And as you have already seen, because of the palace, your capital will almost always be stronger at everything than your other cities. And if you want to build a fleet here, that is probably going to be much faster than building it in another city. So that's why we like to settle near the coast. Sometimes you will also get coastal resources like fish, crabs, or pearls, or something like that. Maybe even an oil patch that you can go exploit later on in the game. And that's another good reason to go coastal. We start here, and I think that will be all for this video. Hope to see you next time when we go more in depth about each of the mechanics in turn.